Well, hey there, welcome back. So we're hopefully going to finish Philippians today. That's the goal at least anyway, but as it tends to be the case, I can sometimes go off on rants like last week. So anyway, we'll see how we go, but it's definitely the aim to get through this, and we'll start on a new series very shortly. So as far as the letter of Philippians is concerned, where we've got up to, Paul's really starting to wrap things up. So he's really sort of drawing on points that he's made to this point throughout the letter, and really just sort of reiterating those points. Okay, so let me just stay again that this is what I need you guys to be thinking about, what I need you guys to be doing. So it's a bit of a wrapping up, and then what we're going to get to at the end is the real point of the letter, actually, which is to say thank you for the offering. Which is really what all of this was about in the first place. But Paul leaves that to the very end for reasons that we'll look at again, hopefully today. So what we got to last week, we're up to verse 17, and what Paul is doing here is just, again, one of the potential threats that the Philippians face is from false teachers. And so Paul's solution to that is very simple. Identify the true teachers. Identify who the real Christians are. It's not about trying to figure out all the different heresies and all the different things that are wrong, or the different wrong nuances that different teachers might have that would identify them as a false teacher. His point is to say, look, just go and figure out what the true teacher is, and if it doesn't look like that, then it's probably fake or it's probably a false thing, which is a much easier way to approach it. If you know what the true thing is, then it's quite clear from that perspective what the false thing is. And so what Paul obviously holds up in this situation is himself as a primary example. He's being compared to these other Judaizers, these teachers who are insisting on the Jewish law to be Christian. And Paul's saying, look, if that was the way it was, I would be the ideal teacher even in that circumstance. Like, whichever way you look at it, I'm the ideal exemplar, but that's not what the gospel looks like. So look at the way that I live out the gospel and the way that I've taught that, and what you're looking for is anything that looks like that. And so it's a pretty simple principle that he sets out in verse 17. He says, join together in following my example. So anything that looks like me, and brothers and sisters, and just as you have us as a model, keep your eyes on those who live as we do. So I'm not the only exemplar, but I'm what it should look like. And so if it looks like what I'm doing, then carry on. That's what it also should look like. Now, he would have particular people in mind here. At least Timothy and probably Epaphroditus would be the key figures that he's actually got in mind. And this is what Paul really sort of sets, the way that he sort of models these churches is that he shows everybody what it should look like, and then he leaves behind people, or he trains up other people who are working within that model. So he disciples them and they become disciplers of the rest of the church. So he's got those people in mind, people that are part of his team or people that have, been personally mentored by him. And those are the ones that he can leave behind and say, look, I'm not going to be around, but so long as you're following this other person, then everything is okay here. So keep an eye on those people, critically examine them. And so it's not just, keep an eye on them, but no, actually critically examine them. It's actually watch their lives and study their lives. Look at it in depth, look at it behind the scenes. Don't just base it on what you might see them doing at church, just the public persona, but actually get to know these people, as we talked about last week in my whole long pastoral rant about how to find exemplars. So you're not just looking for the one role model, but you're looking for people who are within that mold as well. And Paul says that's what we're looking for here. And if you find that, which there are good examples of that in the Philippian church, you guys will know then what a false teacher looks like, because they'll come in and do the very opposites. That's how you will know that you've got a false teacher in your midst. So do that, very important. And that way Paul can also sort of, if this is the last thing he's going to say to them, then at the very least, it's clear to them what they should be doing moving forward. Paul may die as very shortly after writing this letter. And so as long as he knows that he's got people in the church that are going to carry on the work after him, then all is well. So this is in verse 18, for as I have often told you before and now tell you again, even with tears, many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their destiny is destruction, their God is their stomach, and their glory is in their shame. Their mind is set on earthly things, but our citizenship is in heaven. So what he's talking about here are not people that are quite obviously opposed to the gospel. I mean, you think you've got a teacher like Paul, who is an apostle and who's an obvious exemplar of the Christian life, and he's not comparing himself to people who are outside the faith. That's obvious. You're not going to be following somebody as a Christian exemplar who doesn't even believe in Christ and who's quite obviously living as an enemy of the cross. That's obvious. So that's not who he's talking about here, right? The Philippians know who those people are. And it's even more profoundly obvious in a first century context where really anything goes. I mean, morally speaking, anything goes. And so it's obvious who the Christians are not. He's talking here about people that are within the kingdom, people who are claiming to be Christian, people who are part of the church, but who are actually working against the purposes of the kingdom. So it's not just about being in the kingdom, but it's actively advancing the cause of that kingdom. And that's what we're looking for here. It's not, it's anyone can claim to be a Christian, and anyone can maybe even be a Christian and maybe have, a faith and be part of a Christian community, but still be living as an enemy of the cross, actually be working against the purposes of Christ. And so Paul's saying that just don't take them at surface level. Don't just look at them and say, oh, well, that person's a Christian. They come to church every week, so they must be the right person to follow. They must be a good exemplar. No. Examine their life, actually get to know who these people are, and get to know them behind the scenes. Because again, they might be putting on a good show at church, but behind the scenes, they're actually quite a monster, or at the very least, living in contradiction or working against the cross. So you've got to get to know who these people are. You've got to watch their lives and critically examine them in order to determine who those people are. Because unfortunately, there are wolves in sheep's clothing, to play the metaphor. And so he says the problem for these people is that they might claim to be in the faith, they might claim to be part of the Christian community, but their destiny will be revealed as a result of the life that they've lived. You can say you're one thing, but the life you're living is moving in a certain direction. It has an inevitable outcome. It's not that, God has been unmerciful and just punishing somebody because they disagree with him. No, if you live in a certain way, you're moving in a certain direction, that is going to have a consequence, which is a destination. Like you're moving towards a certain goal. Paul talks about the telos. We're moving towards this telos, this goal of maturity, which is Christ-likeness. If you're moving in that direction, that's what you're going to get. It's as simple as that. If you're pursuing a certain thing, that's what you're going to become. But if you're working against that, if you're walking the opposite way to that, I can't help where you end up. You are just simply going to end up in the destination you're walking towards. And the way he characterizes this is he says that their minds are set on earthly things. Yes, they're claiming to have this Christian faith, but it might be a guise for otherwise secular living, or otherwise just very selfish, narcissistic living. They might claim to be a Christian, but they're actually living to worship themselves. And so their brand of Christianity, when it's properly exposed, is realize that actually, no, they've just positioned themselves in the place of Christ. They haven't actually surrendered to him at all. They're just doing it for themselves. And so they're living for earthly things. They're living for the here and now. That's fine. That's their prerogative. But where they end up is going to be the result of that destination that they're pursuing. So again, that can't be helped. That's just the way that they're going. So they're pursuing the things of this life. They're pursuing their own ends. That's where it's going to be. But as Paul reminds them, our citizenship is in heaven. So again, this is just to reiterate everything that he's been talking about, particularly with this idea of citizenship. He introduced this idea of citizenship very early on in the letter. And he sort of characterizes the Christian life in the same way as somebody in that world would understand what citizenship means, both within the context of their city. So if you're a Philippian, there are certain characteristics about the Philippian identity that you're proud of. You're a citizen of Philippi, and that means something. That actually brings with it expectations. It actually brings with it a certain set of values. That is what your citizenship is, and so therefore you embody that, you exemplify that. But also you're a citizen of the Roman Empire, and that has its own prerogatives as well. Primarily amongst those is the worship of the emperor, and basically just to live in accordance with the will of the imperial family. So you've got that idea of citizenship, which is very firmly embedded within a first century mindset. And so Paul says, but let's not forget, our primary citizenship is heaven. It is God's kingdom. Yes, you're part of the Roman citizenship. You're a Roman citizen. You're a Philippian citizen. That is not without meaning, but it's not to take priority over your overall citizenship, which is you're citizens of the kingdom of heaven. So that's what you need to be constantly focused on. And if that's the case, then that brings with it a certain set of values. It brings with it a certain set of behaviors, as would be expected of citizenship in any other context that you might find yourself in. And so really, this is kind of by way of reminder, because again, he introduced this idea in 127, where he says, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, and using the term polituomai, which is to literally say, act as citizens. That's what the verb is that he's using there. And so everything from that point to now has really been a summary then, or a description of what citizenship actually looks like. The whole letter of Philippians, the body of the letter of Philippians, is a reminder, a general description of what it means to be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, what the values actually look like. And so some of the things that he's talked about, for instance, is stand up for the gospel, even in the face of hostility and suffering. And so, you are going to go through a hard time, but that is only to really show you where your commitment truly lies. And so if you're standing up for the gospel, if you're fighting for the gospel, then that is what a good citizen does. A citizen fights for their country. A citizen will fight for whatever group they're part of. In fact, here in Australia, we celebrated Anzac Day yesterday. And for us, it really is an important national day, because it commemorates the soldiers who went and fought and died for Australia, for our freedoms. And so we commemorate that, and particularly those that have given their lives for this nation, we celebrate that. And so we stop and we're reminded of this price that has been paid by the men and women over the last century and a little bit of the Australian nation. That was just how everybody was expected to be. Not, very few people will fight for Australia, and very few people, even less of those, will die for Australia, certainly now in the context we live in. But go back to the first century, it was expected that you fight and die for your city, for your citizenship. And so that is what is expected. And the same thing is true for the Christian citizenship. You are expected to stand up for it, to defend it if necessary, and sometimes even in the face of persecution and death. That is what's expected of that, because this is your primary identity. And so it's something worth fighting for. And so that was one of the key indicators. So you're looking for somebody who has that attitude, who has that desire to stand up and fight for this kingdom. But then he talks about the model of Christ, the way that we're supposed to love and serve one another just as Christ did. And so he talks about the whole, Christ, though being God, did not consider equality with God to be grasped. That whole idea is what we should exemplify as well, that it's not about us. It's not about my personal gain. Jesus is God, and he had everything, and yet he still laid all of that down. Well, then how much more should we lay down our own prerogatives and our own lives and expectations for the sake of others? So if it's good enough for Christ, it's got to be good enough for us. So that model, if you see that in a person, that is a good sign that you're dealing with somebody who's worth following. Somebody who's willing to fight for the gospel, who's willing to pay the price for the gospel, but somebody who's also willing to serve others. If somebody is in it for themselves, they're not going to lay down their lives for another person. It's just as simple as that. And so already you can identify who the true citizens are, because they're ready to fight and they're ready to serve the greater cause or the greater good of the city itself. So these are some key indicators that we're looking for in our citizenship. But then he also talks about working out your salvation. So we looked at that a few episodes ago, but this idea of working out your salvation and being a light in the darkness. It's not just about, I'm saved and I'm part of this community, but I don't do anything about it. No, you are somebody who is constantly seeking to be sanctified, somebody who's constantly working and allowing Christ to work on them, constantly working out their salvation. So somebody who's actively pursuing the characteristics of this citizenship is, again, somebody you should follow. So, again, if a person's living for themselves, they're not looking to change. They're looking to, bring everything into their orbit and make it fit their own desires. But if somebody is changing for the good of others and seeking better ways to serve other people and to also be transformed themselves into Christ, into the image of Christ, again, that's an obvious sign that we're dealing with somebody who is a worthy exemplar, somebody who is a person that you can look to as an example of what it should look like. But also another key indicator, and it's an obvious one that we've looked at, is that you're not looking for somebody who is pursuing self-righteousness, as these false teachers are. If their whole CV is, look at me, look how holy and righteous I am, look at these wonderful ways in which I pursue the law, and I'm so perfect and so wonderful, you should be like me. Again, you're dealing with a false teacher. There's no humility in that for a start, but obviously it's somebody who is Well, they think they're Christ. They think they've already been perfected. If that is your position, then already you've misunderstood the whole point of sanctification. So somebody who is coming in and saying, I am perfect and you should be just like me, again, clearly that's somebody who you should not be looking towards. And even when Paul says, use me as an example, his point is to say, look at the way that I'm pursuing Christ. Look at the way that I'm constantly trying to be transformed into that image. So it's look at the method by which I'm pursuing him rather than look at my great achievements. Because again, Paul could say, if it's about achievements, I win every day, but it's not about the achievements. What it is about is the pursuit. It's about the sanctification. That's the journey that I'm on and what I'm hoping you guys will follow me on. And so then bringing it up to our passage, he says, just follow those who are mature, somebody who is actively walking that same path, somebody who is on the same road that I've been on. It doesn't have to be me, but if it's somebody who's doing the same journey, then that's a great exemplar. That's somebody who you can look up to. And what you notice about these characteristics is that there's nothing special about them. It's not look at the person who's the smartest or look at the person who's the most talented or the most gifted or the person who has the most charisma or wealth or all of these things that are earthly things. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's about an attitude. It's about a constant sanctification, a constant process of seeking Christ and wanting to become more like him. If that is what this person is doing as their starting point, then you're pretty much on the right track. Of course, they're going to make mistakes. Of course, they're going to have their little issues. But if that is their general procedure, if that's their overall what it is they're trying to do, that's a true Christian. And that's somebody that you can follow. And quite frankly, that can be anybody. That can be anyone from any walk of life can have that same disposition towards Christ. So it doesn't require certain earthly skills or certain talents that would basically eliminate the majority of the church as being potential exemplars. So we're citizens of heaven, and so what we're looking for is are people who embody what that looks like, and that's everything we've just described in this letter so far. So he goes on in verse 20, he says, but our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who, by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control, will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm in the Lord. In this way, dear friends. So the goal that Paul sets out for citizenship is not do better or be more intelligent, or it's not something. It's not something that excludes most people. It's just simply stand firm. It's know your place in the kingdom and stand firm in that. Sometimes you need to fight for it. Sometimes you just need to pursue it. Whatever it looks like, just stand firm. Anyone can do that. Anybody can just patiently wait for God to do what it is that he's trying to do. Anyone is capable of that. And that's what the benchmark is. That's ultimately what this whole citizenship looks like. So that wraps up this bigger idea throughout the letter, which is this idea of citizenship. But there is one practical concern that Paul has in this letter. There's a practical concern going on in the Philippian church. As great as the Philippian church is, no church is perfect, okay? The Philippians, they may not be the Corinthian church, but they still have some of their issues some issues of their own, for the simple fact that you're dealing with a group of people who don't always get along. That's just the way things are. We are humans in community, and sometimes we don't agree with each other, and sometimes we get angry with each other or whatever that looks like. Sometimes we go to war with each other. I mean, it's impossible to find a perfect community because it doesn't exist. And so even in the best churches, you're going to have your faults. You're going to have people who are going to be in a disagreement with each other. That's just the way it is. And it's probably a comforting fact to note that even in Paul's churches, there were these problems. I mean, again, use the Corinthians as an example. Those guys had some serious problems. But even in the Philippian church, Paul's favorite church, the one that is his pride and joy, these are his children, even they still had their issues. And so he's dealing with a specific issue here between two women in the church. Now, this is so interesting. The fact that he calls out two women, and he calls them out by name. Now, this isn't to embarrass them. This is an important point. He doesn't call people out by name to embarrass them. In an honor-shame society, there is a sense in which you want to draw attention to the fact that they need to fix something up. And in an unashamed society, that is fine. That goes as par for the course in the way that we in the way that you handle things. You draw attention to the person who's in the wrong. So he actually does that culturally. That's perfectly fitting. But what you notice that's different here, he calls them out by name, but what he would normally do in a situation is to leave them unnamed. He would normally say certain people are doing these things, or a particular person is acting in a certain way. That's actually the real attempt to shame a person. You don't even give them the dignity of calling them out. You don't even acknowledge that they're an actual person. You talk about some random person, even though everybody knows who you're talking about. The normal process is to call them out and actually point to them and say, hey, do better. Like, come on, you're better than this. By not naming them, by talking about them when they're there in the room, talk about them and everyone knows you're talking about them, but don't actually mention them, don't actually acknowledge that they're there. That's still today a really big way to embarrass somebody, a really big way to shame them is to not even acknowledge their presence. So he does this most of the time, particularly again in Corinthians. He talks about certain wrongdoers who are doing the wrong thing, but doesn't actually give them any names. He just talks about their behavior. Everyone knows who he's talking about, but he doesn't actually call them out. So in this case, it is to put the spotlight on them to fix the error of their ways, but it's actually in a way that's culturally appropriate as a way of saying, I'm doing this because I love you. I'm actually doing this because I want the very best for you. I actually want you guys to fix this because I respect you. And so I'm going to draw attention to you, but so that you guys will realize that this particular thing that's going on is not on. So that's number one. That's the sort of the technique that he uses. But what's so interesting about this is that the people that he calls out are actually two women. So he says in 4 verse 2, he says, I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. So what's so fascinating about this is that these are two women. Now, in any ancient society, women do not get acknowledged. You don't care about the women, right? In a public forum, the women are, if they're even there, you don't acknowledge them. You only deal with the men. The men are the only people that matter in such a public setting. The fact that Paul calls out two women is of significance because, well, number one, he draws attention to the fact that they're there. I mean, no one would normally do that, but the fact that he actually identifies two women and singles them out for attention is in and of itself an extraordinary thing. They're like that. That's something we can't overlook. This is a really big deal, is the fact that these two women even have any sense of prominence within there. But even more than that, why is he calling these two women out? Why is it such a concern that these women get along? Well, because obviously they have some influence in the church. If these were two people that are on the fringes of the church, people who are of otherwise no consequence, people who are just basically just plebs, lay people in the church, that if they're there or not at church, no one really cares, no one really notices because they're not, they don't do anything. They're not of actually any real practical significance within the greater good of the community. If that was the case for who these people were, he wouldn't say anything about it because, of course, there's going to be disagreements. In any community, there's going to be lots of disagreements behind the scenes and that have really no bearing on the overall well-being of the community, certainly not enough to publicly call them out. I mean, if you're doing that in every church, then you would never stop. Every Sunday would just be about calling out every single person who has a disagreement with somebody else in the church or whatever it might be. Nothing would ever get done. You'd be just constantly drawing attention to everybody's little disputes and squabbles. Now, you call it out when it matters. You call it out when it actually has some bearing on the good of the church. These two women obviously hold a place of importance in the community because the fact that they're having a fight is causing greater harm to the community. That can only happen if they're in a place of significance, if they're in a place of leadership, if they've got some sort of role whereby if they are having a dispute, other people are going to be impacted by that. Well, again, you can only impact somebody if you're a person of significance or consequence within the church community. So the safest conclusion we can make here is that these are two women leaders in the church. Probably house church leaders. And we know that Paul had house church leaders in his churches. We know, for example, that in Corinth, we had a Chloe who has her own house church within the Corinthian community. So this is something that Paul does. The very foundation of the Philippian church was with Lydia, right? So this female who was the first pastor of Philippi. So this is not unusual. This is pretty normal stuff. The fact that Paul's calling these two women, it's not just picking on the women, he's calling them out because they've got places of significance. And if they keep this dispute going, that's going to cause problems for the rest of the community because it's going to divide the community up. It's as simple as that. Like in any church, if you've got two house group leaders or Bible study leaders that are causing divisions, the rest of the church is going to suffer as a result of that. And so that's the point where you actually have to step in and deal with this because it's a threat to the church. Same thing happening here. But again, it's the fact that he's doing it with women. The fact that it's two women that are actually in this position is of incredible significance just to the nature of Paul's ministry and the way in which he just so comfortably and easily had women doing ministry just as easily as the men. There was no distinction as far as Paul was concerned. It's like, can you do the job? Do you have Christ in you? I don't care what your gender is. Christ works through anybody. Are you mature in Christ? You've got the job. Again, I don't care what your gender is, just get the job done. And if there's a problem like we see here, then we'll deal with it. But otherwise, carry on and just get the work done. And so what he says to them as a solution to the problem is to be of the same mind. And this is a term phroneo that he uses throughout the letter. It's to think along similar lines. He's not correcting and saying, well, you're wrong and you're right, and so you need to forgive this other person. No, he's like, look, okay, if there's a dispute, it's because you're not thinking in the same way. It's not that you're not seeing the bigger picture. And if you think about all disputes, they just generally boil down to disputes over minor matters. It's like, well, I think we should do it this way. Well, I think we should do it this way. But you actually lose sight of the bigger picture because you actually agree on what the bigger picture is. Like if you're doing church, it's to do church, is to create a community that is reflective of the presence of Christ. We all agree on that. What we disagree on is the detail. And so what Paul's saying is just have the same mind. It's just to have a Christ-like mind. And the previous time that he used this especially was when he says, have the same mind as Jesus Christ, who being God didn't consider equality with God and he grasped. Have that same mind. If you do, what you're going to have is a shared mind that says we're here to serve. We're here to lay down our lives and our little petty, positions or our little petty, desires, whatever they might be, we lay those things down for the greater good of the community. If you have that same mind, then you will get over this dispute very quickly because you'll see it in context, which is that, well, the bigger picture has been lost here. So get that same mind, the one that I've been talking about all the way through this letter, have that same shared outlook as a community, and you may still have the same disagreement. Okay, you may not fully agree on all the details, but you won't shipwreck the community. That little issue won't cause division unnecessarily. We're not all going to agree. We're not all going to have exactly the same outlook on how things should be done. Of course, that's just the way things are because we all see things from a different point of view. But if we have that bigger picture in mind, then those little differences of opinion or differences of outlook are overshadowed by the fact that, look, we can all agree that we're trying to get the same thing done. In fact, I'm sort of seeing this a little bit. I took over coaching. I started coaching my son's football team this year, and we're only a couple of rounds into the season. It's been a lot of fun. But there's a big picture that we have, or that is the team needs to have, and this is sort of something from the top down, but it's a value that I kind of want for the team. Priority number one is that they have fun. It's an under 10s team. They're not professional players. They're just there to have some fun. They're just there to find some friends. So priority number one is to have fun. And priority number two is to learn some basic footy skills and learn how to play as a team. Just learn how to, over time, how to work together as a team and maybe even get a few wins on the board. That's the priority. That's the big picture. But already, and of course, you're going to expect that the parents of the kids have different positions on what the priority should be. For some of the parents, is win at all cost. And for other parents, is my boy needs to have all of the opportunities and my boy needs to have the best position. And so you can imagine, it's stereotypical of a kid's team of any sport and the parents who've all got their own different positions. And if we don't have that bigger picture, if I don't keep reinforcing, not just for the kids, but also for the parents, the bigger picture is, are they having fun? Are they learning footy skills? Are they playing together better as a team? If they lose sight of that, then it does become about the little things. And that's where the divisions and the disputes start to emerge. And so it's no different in any community. For Paul in the church, it's focus on Christ, the big picture of the kingdom of God. And despite the disputes that are going to happen, they're going to happen, but as long as we've got the bigger picture always in mind, those things are going to be overshadowed by what that bigger picture is. And so this is as a solution also to this in verse 3. Yes, and I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. So whoever this true companion is, we're not sure. One of the other leaders, maybe it's Luke. We're not 100% sure exactly who this person is that we're referring to. But basically Paul says, look, both you women are very mature. Unfortunately, you're getting stuck on this unfortunate dispute, but you need to get back to that place of maturity. And so what we're going to do is get somebody else who's also mature and somebody else who is one of your co-workers and bring them in and ask them just to be a mediator between this and just sort out what this is, agree to disagree if we have to come to that, but at the very least to diffuse the situation by pointing out the bigger picture. Let's get back to what this is actually about, and then hopefully, even if you may not agree on the details, at the very least, you can keep them in perspective and sort of figure out a way to work together so that you can both actually be productively moving towards what this greater goal is. So this is in verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. And I'll say it again, rejoice. This is another just resounding idea that's going throughout the letter. Just rejoice. Just enjoy being in Christ. Keep that bigger picture in mind and just recognize what you have in Christ. Recognize the goodness and just recognize just how different and better your life is as a part of this community, despite the petty squabbles, despite all the things that are going on. Just rejoice. And again, this has been a theme throughout. Paul says, I pray with great joy as I think about you guys, despite my circumstances and, the fact that I'm in prison and I might be dead tomorrow. I think about you guys and I don't even worry about that stuff anymore. I just think about how great it is that even if I was to die tomorrow, I've had this incredible experience of getting to know you guys, just having had that experience and been part of your journey towards Christ. I can rejoice in that. It's not just about positive thinking, but it's about keeping a perspective on the things that are wins, that are actually great achievements and that are actually something to celebrate and something to reflect on and say, that was a great day, or this has been a great whatever it's been. And again, I guess I can use this footy analogy. The boys played this morning and they won, by the way, in case you're wondering. But it's this same sort of idea, if there's no sense of achievement, if there's no sense of great things happening, it is so easy to focus in on the little things that are wrong, to focus in on the negatives and focus in on the things that would otherwise tear the group apart. And so, I'm sure we could nitpick over today's game. There was things that the boys could have done better. Of course there was. They're 10 and they're just learning how to play footy. But they won. It's like, let's just rejoice in that. Let's just be happy about it. Keep that as the bigger perspective. And from there, we can at least work on the little things. But rejoice in the circumstances and in the greater, bigger picture. And it will just at least relativize what those other things are. So just rejoice in the Lord as a part of the community. And you'll be amazed at just how much that can overshadow, or even just prospectively just turn into a non-issue. It actually doesn't matter anymore in light of the great things that are actually happening. So it goes on, verse 5, he says, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. If as a community you're rejoicing in the Lord, despite the circumstances, even in the face of the circumstances, people notice. People will see the difference. They will know that that would normally crush a person, and yet somehow you can still not necessarily be happy about it, but it's not overwhelming you. You still can find joy in life. It's just that you're a glass half full person or an optimistic person. There's something different about it. There's something about that joy that is real that enables you to keep a bigger perspective. You can keep a sense of the bigger picture of the greater achievement that's happening. And so for the Philippians, in spite of the potential persecution or in spite of the various challenges that you're going to face, if you rejoice in the Lord, you will always have that bigger heavenly kingdom perspective that just at least gives everything perspective, but is able to overwhelm and really compensate for whatever potential struggles that you might be going through. So again, by way of reiteration, going all the way back to the start of the letter, guys, let me just say it again. If this is the last thing you hear from me, let it be this. rejoice. Just rejoice in what you're doing, in where you are, and let that take care of what the rest of the matters actually are. Verse 8, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So this idea of thinking about something, it's the word logizomai. Literally, it's an accounting term. Take into account all of the variables, take into account all of the incomes and all of the outgoings, and it's literally this idea of keeping accounts, of actually keeping a budget. It's just whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is just good in this life, whatever is quite obviously godly in this life, take all of that into account. Keep perspective on those things. Don't focus in on all the negatives and all the things that are wrong. Take into consideration what is good. Take into consideration when you see in a person noble characteristics, take note of that. Don't just go, oh, that's interesting, but actually imbibe it in yourself. Take it into account in your own life and ask yourself, maybe, is that something I'm exemplifying? Is that something I could do better at? And see it in someone else and maybe see it in your own life as well. So take all those things into account. Again, it's not a specific instruction. It's just a general, if you see good things in this life, take note of them. Don't just dismiss them easily. Don't just forget about them. Take note of them. Remember them. Let them stand out in your life and just see if by meditating on them, by accounting them into your life, maybe they'll also become part of your life. Maybe that will be something that you can aspire to do as well. If you see what is good in another person that's bringing success and happiness, it's worth taking note. It's worth going, well, maybe those are some of the things that I could be doing in my own life as well. So whatever those things are, Paul says, take them into account and incorporate them into your own life, into your own Christian walk. Again, finally, verse 9, whatever you have heard or learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. So whatever noble things, whatever good things, whatever true, beautiful things that you might see in life, also think back to my life. Think about the example that I demonstrated. Not to boast, but I've kind of got a lot of those things going on here myself. Pay attention to that as well. If you've got no other exemplars that you directly in front of you, just think back to the example that you saw in me. Focus on the things that you've seen or heard and learned from me, and put them into practice in your own life. Discipleship, again, it's not about learning a whole lot of theory. It's about watching somebody else, seeing how they do it, and trying it for yourself. It's just, okay, well, if it works for you, it's probably going to work for me if I do the same thing. So why don't I start to practice the things that you're doing? And so Paul says, that's it. It's as simple as that. And if you saw it in me, you can trust it. Like I'm a trusted apostle. Like I'm somebody you can look to as an example. If you see it in me, it's probably a good thing. So give it a go in your own life and let's just see what happens. And so we get now to the final point of the letter. And really this is, again, what this whole letter has been moving towards and really what started this whole thing. Remember, the whole point of Philippians was that they'd sent an offering to Paul and Epaphroditus had got sick along the way, and so he wasn't able to come back, and then they got worried, and so they sent another letter. And so there was just a whole big confusion that had taken place. But the gift has got to him, and now he's sending Epaphroditus back with this letter. And what this letter is, amongst many other things, a letter of thanks. It's a letter of recognition or a receipt that I got the gift, I got the thing that you sent me in the first place, which is what started this whole process. And so what Paul does is that he leaves this to the very end. Now, it's not because he's trying to be rude. It's not like it's not because he wants to be dismissive of it. Actually, it's the very opposite. What he wants is that this is the very last thing that the Philippians hear. You've sat here and you've listened to this whole letter being read out to you. You're about to leave. It's the end of the meeting. You're about to leave. You might forget most of what I've said, but let this be the most important thing you hear from me, which is my gratitude and my recognition of the gift that you've sent. And so he saves it to the very end for that purpose. This is the key point. If you forget everything else that I've said, please hear this is my gratitude and my gratefulness and my recognition of what it is that you've done for me. However, it's really important that we keep some contextual perspective on what Paul is about to say. This is a letter of friendship. We've already talked about that this letter to the Philippians is a letter of friendship. It's a letter between friends of a way of, keeping up communications and all of those things, like pen pals. That's the context, and that's the relationship that Paul has established with the Philippians that he's maintaining through this letter. That all makes sense. All of that's good and well. But what we need to keep in mind is that in the first century, friendship had a very different set of expectations. Friendship was absolutely about quid pro quo. We think about friendship today and we just think about mutual agreement, people that we get along with, people that we just whose company we enjoy, and people that we don't feel like we owe anything to. They don't owe anything to us. We just like to be around them. They build our lives, we build their lives, and all of that. It's just all a very relational sort of a thing. There was an element of that, of course, because humans are relational creatures, and you find people that you agree with, who you get along with, and you want to spend time with that person because they bring something positive into your life. And so all of that is perfectly normal. But there was a social expectation around ancient friendship, which was much more fixed. It was much more prominent when it came to the relationship. And that was this idea of quid pro quo. If I've done something for you, that makes you my friend. But if I've done something for you, you owe me something in return. I've helped you, but I expect something back, because otherwise what you're showing me is ingratitude. You show me your gratitude by giving me something in return. Now, that's how I see it from my perspective, but from your perspective, you also have a desire and an obligation to reciprocate back to me. Because if I've given you something, if I've helped you in some way, lent you some money or bought you something or whatever service I've provided for you, what I've done is that I've put you in an inferior position. Everyone now knows that you needed my help. That makes me better than you. And so in terms, we might be friends, we might get along, but I'm better than you. I've got a superior position to you because of this favor that I've just done for you. So you need to reciprocate to me because you need to show gratitude. Because if you are looking for help from anyone else later on, you need to be known as being a person who shows gratitude by reciprocating in kind whatever else it is that I've given to you. But it's not enough just to give me back exactly what it is that I first gave you. That might make us even, but it doesn't make you better. And this is a world where it's about being the best. It's always about being on top. It's about being the number one. If I give you back exactly what you gave me, then we're equals. But for me to be better than you, I need to give you back something more. If you give me $100, I need to give you back $110 because I always need to be seen to be the person who's superior. Now, if I've returned to you $110, I've put you in my debt. I've now set you into the inferior position. So now honor requires you to give me back more. You need to give me back 120, and then I give you 130. And you can see how this thing can continue on to the point where our friendship can quite literally bankrupt us, because it's always essential that we have to outdo one another in reciprocating gifts. And so quite literally, when it comes to gift giving, the first principle of gift giving is always give the biggest gift. And if you get a bigger gift, you need to give back an even bigger one. And this can keep going until one of us is bankrupt. And then in this friendship, I win because I've bankrupted you. And so now I am in the superior position simply because of this so-called friendship that we have. So the way that a friendship will often begin, we may not know each other, we might just be loose acquaintances. And I hear that you've got an issue, you need some help in some way. I come up to you and I say, hey, I hear you need some help. And so I would like to give you the support that you need. Well, I've put you in a very awkward position right there because number one, you could accept my help and that puts you in the inferior position. You now are obligated to give back to me whatever it is and then some of the gift that I've given you. Or you could refuse my help, my very generous offer of help. You could refuse that. And so now I've made an enemy, or you've made an enemy of me because you've thrown it back in my face. I was generous. I was trying to give you, I was trying to help you out and trying to be a good friend. And you just threw it back in my face, you ungrateful so-and-so. And so you can either not pay me back and accept the gift and not pay me back and be seen as ungrateful. You can refuse the gift and be seen as ungrateful, or you can give it back to me with some on top, and now you've put yourself into debt, and now I have to put myself into debt. So basically, whichever way you look at it, we're going to destroy each other's lives as a result of this. That's friendship. That's just simply how it works. Now we go, that sounds horrible, but yeah, it is. But I guess if you think about politics, the way that politics works, this you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of situation, nothing has actually changed. Only we need to translate that into all of life. Every relationship has this element of this quid pro quo, this reciprocation of this relationship. And so you can imagine then Paul is very careful not to let this relationship with the Philippians get to that point or become characterized by that sort of relationship. What Paul wants to establish with the Philippians is a genuine friendship, but a Christ-like friendship. And what does a Christ-like friendship look like? Well, it's I'll lay down my life for you. It's not about paying me back. I'll give you everything with no expectation of anything in return. That's what the Christian community is supposed to look like. That's what agape love looks like. I will give you everything with no expectation of anything in return, and I'll do it simply because I love you, simply because I want you to be lifted up, even if it comes at my expense. That's what the Christ-like friendship relationship looks like. And that is entirely countercultural to everything you would expect within this ancient society. And so you can imagine then Paul is being very, very careful here about the way that he navigates the situation. They've just sent him a generous gift. Now they've continually sent him gifts, but of course, if you remember what Paul would reciprocate with in this business relationship, remember this is a koinonia, this is a business relationship that he has, not a friendship. It's a, I'll do this, you do this, and this is how we work in our business together. And so there's that mutual expectation, but it's what we've both agreed to at the outset. You give me money, I'll preach the gospel, and that's how we grow this business together. So you don't have this reciprocation going on in a business partnership. That's a very different dynamic. And so what Paul's trying to do here is to keep the perspective back on the business relationship and not let it become a friendship, which is, well, the Philippians might go, well, hang on, we just sent you all of this money. What do we get in return? Right? What do we get back? Now, I mean, this is something you might have even seen in a church setting. Somebody who'll say, well, I'm giving all of this money to the church. What's in it for me? Right? You know, what am I buying with all of my generous tithes and offerings that I'm giving to you every week? And so you could easily imagine how in this situation it could devolve into that sort of thing. So Paul's trying to avoid that at all costs. And so the way that he does this, the way that he says thank you it's really threading the needle. It's really trying to avoid that sort of outcome. Remembering too that this is a community that's changed a lot. It's a lot of new people who maybe don't know Paul, that he needs to be very careful just to say that things might have changed. He doesn't quite know who's at the other end and how they might receive or what sort of expectation might be around them with regard to this relationship. And so we keep that in mind as we're reading these next 10 verses, because you can see Paul, it almost seems like he's ungrateful, but he's not. He's trying to avoid this even worse outcome. But Paul would be almost like, I'd rather you think I'm ungrateful than you think that you put me in a position where I owe you something, where this just becomes a quid pro quo. Because the minute it becomes that, it stops being the gospel, right? It stops being about the kingdom. Whatever you did for the kingdom, and whatever I do for the kingdom. It's just that we happen to be doing it together and doing it for one another. But the bigger priority is the kingdom here. And if it is just about us, then, well, frankly, I'm in your debt. Frankly, I owe you more than I could ever give back. And so that puts me in the inferior position, but that changes the whole dynamics, again, of what we're trying to do here. So this is in verse 10, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. So he brings it back to the business partnership. Right, Paul could have framed this as, I'm so grateful. Thank you guys for thinking about me. Oh, it was so generous and so wonderful. He could, but that creates the friendship scenario. He's bringing it back to the business scenario, which is that you had an obligation to me. You made a promise. You're fulfilling your promise. This is generous. Don't get me wrong, but you're being generous on the terms that you set for yourself. It's like like any relationship, if I give you my word that I'm going to do something and I come along later on and fulfill my word, well, I'm only doing what I said I was going to do. It still may be generous, but it's not an out of the blue, oh, you're so thoughtful and oh my goodness, I feel like I owe you so much. No, you said you would do this and you've upheld your word. And so Paul frames it again within that context. And he says, it wasn't that you'd forgotten about me. You just hadn't had the opportunity to help me up until this point. And so thank you for maintaining the promise and the obligation that you set for yourself all those years ago when we first started this business partnership. He says, verse 11, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Now, of course, we love that last verse. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. We haven't got the time to go into it today. We might even do a whole episode just on this verse and how poorly it gets abused. Maybe that we can do that in the next few weeks. But again, this isn't that Paul is minimizing the gift that they've given, but it's to keep the bigger perspective that it's ultimately God who's looking after me. Christ is the one who provides for me. And here I am in prison and I'm in desperate need of any support that I can get, but let's not lose sight of the fact that it's Christ who provides for me. And so if he's providing for me, then I've always got what I need. I'm always going to be provided for because it's Christ who is doing the provision primarily. So again, I am grateful, but I don't want to just make it all about you and your generosity. I want to keep this kingdom perspective, this business partnership perspective, which is that it's Christ who's actually ultimately the one who's in control of this whole situation. And so I guess to really be not harsh, but he's at least being very, okay, look, let's not get carried away with the generosity of the gift. It is generous, and we'll get to that in a moment, but let's not, again, even lose sight of the fact that you didn't have to do it. And it almost sounds ungrateful, but it is true. Paul is trying to keep the perspective, keep it away from the danger of this quid pro quo friendship, is to say, look, I can go with or I can go without. That's always been the case. I've learned how to live with plenty. I've learned how to live in want. I'm all good. Whatever happens, I'm all good. So that is my starting point for all of this, so that we can at least not let this slip into oh gosh, I was so desperate and you saved my life. Yeah, you definitely helped. But I don't want it to be just about everything you did for me in the great gift, because again, that creates this reciprocity, which can lead to all sorts of damaging consequences for this relationship. So let's not lose sight of the fact that God has got my back. And sometimes I've got plenty, sometimes I've got nothing. Either way, he's got my back, and that's okay. But Christ is looking after me. And so in this situation, it is him looking after me, but he's doing it through you. You're the ones who are actually his agents at the moment. So again, very generous. We're not going to forget that fact. But whatever you're doing for him. And he's doing through you for me. He is the one who's ultimately driving this whole reciprocation that's going on. And so whatever happens, it's always got to come back to him and what he is doing through us, through whatever the circumstances might be. Verse 14, yet it was good of you to share in my troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, except you only. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. And again, to really bring it back to the point of what this relationship is about, it's a business partnership. And so he literally says, no one shared with me in this, in the matter of giving and receiving. He used the word again, koinonia, right? It's this partnership that we've entered into. No one else was willing to enter into that sort of partnership except for you guys. So whatever this is, whatever this gift is that you've done, it is only just an extension of what that is. And so what I'm grateful for is the gift, yes, but what I'm really grateful for is the friendship, is actually the partnership that we have with one another. That's the thing I'm really grateful for, because it's not just about this one gift, but it's about the continual giving that you've been doing for me, but in return, the gospel that I've been able to preach as a result. So it's the fact that we've been able to maintain this relationship is actually the thing that I'm grateful for. So I am grateful, but let's not lose sight of the bigger picture of the actual thing I'm grateful for, which is the ongoing partnership that we've had all this time, that only you guys, no one else, you are the only ones who entered into this with me. And so thank you for that. Thank you for the partnership. It's been incredible. And this is just another reminder and another extension of what that great partnership actually is. Verse 17, not that I desire your gifts. What I desire is that more be credited to your account. I've received full payment and have more than enough. I am amply supplied now that I've received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice pleasing to God. And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. To our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen. And so here's another one we like to take out of context. I might even do it in that same episode. God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. So we love that verse. We love that idea that God's just going to give us everything we desire. No, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that you guys partnered with me in the gospel. And so you've continually supported me in the endeavors that I've been taking on. And that's what this is. This is just another extension of that. And so if you're looking for repayment, look for it from Christ. He's the one who will repay you. Again, this isn't a friendship. If it was a friendship, I'd be going, look, I owe you guys so much. You'll get it back from me as soon as I can afford it. As soon as I get out of jail, I'm going to work and I'm going to pay you back every cent that you've given me and then some. That's what a friendship would look like. But this is a business partnership. And the business partnership at the center of that is Christ. Whatever you guys have done for me right now, you did it for Christ. I was the beneficiary. Thank you very much. I've been the beneficiary of this generous gift and I'm now amply supplied because of this gift. But whatever you did